Welcome to EnglishPass Podcast, brought to you from our local studio in Calgary. I'm your host, Samantha, and today we're diving into an exciting topic, renting an apartment. Whether you're a beginner or intermediate learner, in this podcast, we're helping you level up your English listening and reading skills. And before we get started, let me tell you that the sponsor of this episode is TypeFit, keyboard typing practice and learning platform. Now, let's talk about the weather in Calgary on Friday, January 23, 2026. It's currently minus 15 degrees Celsius, which is about 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with cloudy conditions. It is so cold this cloudy Friday that even the thermometer is shivering. Today, we're exploring something really interesting, renting an apartment. This is a fantastic subject for English learners because it covers a lot of practical vocabulary and real-world situations. So let's dive right in. Renting an apartment is a legal and financial arrangement where an individual pays a set amount of money to live in a property owned by someone else. This process is a fundamental part of modern life for millions of people around the world, whether they are students, young professionals, or families. At its most basic level, renting involves a contract between two main parties. The person who owns the property is called the landlord, while the person living in it and paying the money is known as the tenant. This relationship is built on a series of rights and responsibilities that vary depending on where you live, but the core concept remains the same across most cultures. You provide payment in exchange for a safe and private place to call home. To understand how renting works today, it helps to look back at how this system began. Historically, the concept of a landlord dates back to feudal times, when powerful lords owned vast amounts of land and allowed peasants to live on it in exchange for labor or a portion of their crops. As societies moved toward the Industrial Revolution, people flocked to cities to work in factories. This sudden increase in urban populations created a massive demand for housing, leading to the development of tenements and apartment buildings as we know them today. Over time, governments began to introduce laws to protect tenants from unfair treatment, creating the structured rental market we see in the 21st century. Before someone can even think about moving in, they must first understand the financial side of renting. One of the most common pieces of advice given to new renters is the 30% rule. This suggests that a person should not spend more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. For example, if you earn $3,000 a month, you should ideally look for an apartment that costs $900 or less. However, in many expensive cities like New York, London, or Tokyo, this rule is often difficult to follow. Many people find themselves spending half of their paycheck just to have a roof over their heads. Let us look at a real-world example. Consider Sarah, a university student in London. She needs to find a studio apartment near her campus. Because she is a student and does not have a full-time job, many landlords might be worried about her ability to pay the rent every month. To solve this, Sarah might need a guarantor. This is a person, usually a parent or relative, who signs the contract and promises to pay the rent if Sarah cannot. This is a very common requirement for young people or those with a limited credit history. Once a person finds a place they like, the next step is the application process. This often involves providing proof of income, such as bank statements or pay stubs, and sometimes a credit check to see if the person has a history of paying their bills on time. If the landlord approves the application, the tenant will then sign a lease. A lease is a legally binding document that outlines the terms of the rental agreement. It specifies how much the rent is, when it is due, how long the tenant is allowed to stay, and what the rules are regarding pets, noise, or making changes to the apartment. Understanding every detail of the lease is crucial because once it is signed, it can be very difficult to change the terms. Another important vocabulary word to know is the security deposit. This is a sum of money, usually equal to 1 or 2 months of rent, that the tenant pays to the landlord before moving in. The landlord holds this money in case the tenant causes damage to the apartment or leaves without paying the rent. If the tenant keeps the apartment in good condition and follows all the rules of the lease, the security deposit is usually returned to them when they move out. This brings us to our second example. Imagine Carlos, who is moving to New York City for a new job. In addition to his first month of rent and a security deposit, Carlos might also have to pay a broker fee. This is a payment made to a real estate agent who helped him find the apartment. In some cities, these upfront costs can add up to thousands of dollars, making it very expensive just to start a new lease. Culturally, the experience of renting can be very different depending on where you are. In Japan, for instance, there is a traditional custom known as ryokan, or key money. This is a non-refundable gift paid to the landlord as a sign of gratitude for allowing the tenant to rent the property. This is different from a security deposit because you never get it back. In contrast, in many parts of Germany, apartments are often rented completely empty. This means there are no light fixtures, no appliances, and sometimes not even a kitchen sink. The tenant is expected to buy and install their own kitchen and then take it with them when they leave. Let us consider the Tanaka family in Tokyo for our third example. They are looking for a 3-bedroom flat near a subway station. Because space is limited in Tokyo, apartments are often measured in tatami mats rather than square feet. The Tanakas must carefully calculate their budget to include the monthly rent, the security deposit, and the ryokan. They also have to consider the monthly maintenance fee, which covers the cleaning of common areas like the hallway and the elevator. Many people have misconceptions about who is responsible for what when living in a rental. A common myth is that the landlord must fix everything immediately. While it is true that landlords are generally responsible for major repairs, like a broken heater or a leaking roof, the tenant is often responsible for small things, like changing light bulbs or keeping the apartment clean. If a tenant breaks a window because they were playing ball inside, they cannot expect the landlord to pay for it. This brings us to the concept of utilities. Utilities are the basic services needed to run a home, such as electricity, water, heating, and internet. In some rental agreements, the cost of utilities is included in the rent, but in others, the tenant must set up their own accounts and pay the utility companies directly. For our fourth example, we can look at a digital nomad named Sophia who is renting a furnished apartment in Lisbon for 6 months. Because she moves frequently, she prefers a place that already has a bed, a desk, and kitchen supplies. Furnished apartments are usually more expensive than unfurnished ones, but they save the tenant the trouble and cost of buying furniture. Sophia also benefits from having all her utilities included in one monthly payment, which makes her life much simpler while she works remotely. Another term that often comes up in the rental world is subletting. Subletting happens when the original tenant rents out the apartment or a room within it to someone else. This is common when a tenant needs to leave for a few months, but does not want to break their lease. However, many leases strictly forbid subletting without the landlord's written permission. If you sublet your apartment secretly and get caught, you could face eviction, which is the legal process of being forced to leave the property. In some cities, the government intervenes in the rental market to keep prices affordable. This is known as rent control or rent stabilization. In Berlin, for example, there have been many political debates about how to stop rent prices from rising too quickly. Our fifth example features a young couple in Berlin, Hans and Greta. They live in a rent-controlled apartment, which means their landlord can only increase the rent by a small percentage each year. This provides them with a sense of security, knowing they will not be priced out of their neighborhood as it becomes more popular. Amenities are another factor that can influence the cost and experience of renting. Amenities are the extra features provided by an apartment building, such as a gym, a swimming pool, a rooftop garden, or a laundry room. For our sixth example, consider an elderly couple moving into a modern apartment complex in a suburb of Chicago. They chose this building because it has an elevator and a 24-hour security guard. These amenities make their lives easier and safer, but they also mean the monthly rent is higher than it would be in an older, smaller building without these features. As the end of a lease approaches, the tenant must decide whether they want to renew the contract or move out. If they decide to move, they usually have to give a notice period, often 30 or 60 days, to the landlord. This allows the landlord time to find a new tenant. Before leaving, it is essential to do a final walkthrough of the apartment. This is when the tenant and landlord inspect the property together to check for damages. If the apartment is clean and undamaged, the tenant should receive their full security deposit back, though this is often a point of tension between landlords and tenants. Renting provides flexibility that owning a home does not. It allows people to move for new jobs, explore different neighborhoods, and avoid the high costs of property taxes and major home renovations. However, it also means you are paying for something you will never own, and you must follow someone else's rules. By understanding the vocabulary, the costs, and the legal protections involved, a tenant can navigate the world of renting with confidence and find a place that truly feels like home. Whether you are looking for a small room in a shared house or a luxury penthouse in a skyscraper, the principles of renting remain a vital part of how we live together in cities and towns around the globe. And that's all for today's episode of EnglishPass Podcast. I hope you found this helpful. Remember to practice what you've learned and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we improve. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and join us next time. Let me remind you that the sponsor of the episode is TypeFit, and I suggest to check the link at the description. I'm Samantha, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep learning and keep growing. Goodbye.